Thank you everyone for joining us tonight in person and online for this informative and hopefully entertaining evening talking about the Bayview Mackinac Race, presented in 2024 by National Fleet Services. This will be the 100th consecutive Bayview Mackinac Race, and it's scheduled for July 20th, 2024. And we're looking forward to celebrating this in grand fashion and hopefully make it the biggest race we've ever had. Neither war or COVID has stopped the Mackinac Race, and in fact in 2020, we're pretty sure we're the only long-distance sailboat race to take place on the planet once COVID hit. I think this is the second time we've had an event like this. The first one was organized by Frank Kern when he was race chair in 2009. So I certainly want to thank him for this good idea, and we certainly miss him. A model of his boats above the fireplace, if you're not familiar with Corinthia. I know a lot of us were able to go sailing with him and miss him quite a bit. This year's race chairman is my friend and crewmate Charlie Trost. He put together the panel for this evening and has been hard at work on the race since he was asked to do this almost 2 years ago. Having chaired the race myself, and I know there's some past chairmen here, I know that it's an often thankless job and it's a lot of work. In fact, one former race chairman told me that having run the race, if he knew an employee of his had volunteered to do this, he'd have to fire that person, because there's no way you can do both. I managed to not get fired, but I had a crappy job, so who cares? But I think it's worth a round of applause for Charlie to taking this on, because it's an even bigger deal because it's the 100th. Fortunately, it doesn't have to go it alone. Our Mackinac Race Authority meets monthly, year-round, to make sure the race happens, and happens in a way that maximizes value for sailors and doesn't break the bank for the club. As the 2024 race chair, Charlie's joined by the MRA chairman and my father, Tom Burleson, Treasurer Cindy Ross, Peter Wensler, Commodore Greg Thomas, Kevin Thomas, Commodore Tim Prophit, Bob Eager, and myself. The MRA was created to bring consistency and expertise to the Mackinac Race, so everybody serves a 5-year term. So it's not you learn everything and then you're done. You build up and you stay on once you've been race chairman for 2 years to help pass that knowledge along. You heard several Burlesons, several Thomases, and a lot of Pendragon crew on the MRA. So if you think that's too many, please step up and join us. We're always looking for at-large members for when terms expire, as well as race chairman. Additionally, Charlie's job is made a whole lot easier by race administrator Melissa Wensler. I know she's not here tonight, but she deserves a lot of recognition. I absolutely would have been fired from my day job when I was chairman without her, so I thank her for that. We're also backed up by an army of volunteers who handle pre-race registration, post-race check-in, they develop safety regulations, they physically get us started on race day. I also wanted to point out Mike Davenport, the harbor master in Port Huron, has volunteered his services on the island for years now, and our friends at Port Huron Yacht Club all work together to make this the best experience it can be. So we'll get started with our panel tonight. We have a group of skippers who've done a lot of Mackinac races. They've won a lot of Mackinac races on the shore course, the cove course, one design, handicap, bigger boats, smaller boats, everything. So I look forward to the insight we'll get from them. Our first panelist is Mike Kirkman, who's the owner and skipper of the J120 Hot Ticket. He's done 53 Mackinac races, 36 of those being the Bayview Mackinac Race. In his Mackinac career, he has 5 top 3 overall finishes, 7 class wins, and 28 top 3 finishes. Every Mackinac race he's done has been on a family boat, first the J35 and now the J120. Anyone who's spent any time racing in the Detroit area has seen their trademark giant white spinnaker with a big red dot in the middle. And I'm hoping you might be able to tell us why there's a red dot at some point today. Commodore Tim Prophit has skippered a number of boats, all named Fast Tango, ranging from a Santana 35 to a Mum 36 to his current NA40. Tim's a contender in every race he does. He's a fierce competitor and has done 69 combined Mackinac races. He's won the Bayview race 11 times, including twice overall, once as crew, and then this year on Fast Tango, as the owner, winning the J.L. Hudson Trophy. He's been a boat owner for 29 years and is a wealth of knowledge. Commodore Chuck Storms has done 71 Mackinac races, a lot of them on his own boats, including Trim, the J105 DeTour, and his current Italia 9.98, also named DeTour. With that, he won the Cove Island course overall last year and won his class in the shore course this year. He has 11 race wins, 4 as a skipper, as well as a double-handed Mackinac win and a single-handed Mackinac race overall win. And he docks his boat next to our next panelist, Commodore Greg Thomas. He's done 63 combined races, with most of those on a boat named Pendragon, a legacy started by his father, including an Ericsson 37, a Contessa 43, and now a J130. Greg's won the Mackinac Race 8 times. He's been on the podium 16 times. Notably, he won 3 in a row from 1998 to 2000, 5 out of 6 from 1996 to 2000, and has finished in the top 5 in his class 22 out of the last 28 years. Our 5th panelist is Chris Van Tol, who's done 35 total Mackinac races, and if you've raced on the short course, you've probably spent a lot of time looking at the transom of his dad's CNC 35 Mark II Eliminator. I spent my entire youth looking at the black transom of that boat. And if we beat you guys, it meant things went really, really well on my dad's boat, Sea Fever, and things went really poorly on your boat. And that didn't happen very often. I think Chris has the most Mackinac Race wins of anybody up here with 18 of them. And he's won overall 3 times. Chris also helped build the match racing program here at Bayview as a founding member of the Detroit Cup. He's won the Knickerbocker Cup, 2 Richardson Cups, the Great Lakes Match Racing Championship, and was the top-ranked American match racing helmsman from 2007 to 2009. So we have some questions that we think will fill our time here, but if you have anything you want to ask when we're done, we'll certainly do that. Make sure you have a microphone so everybody can hear you, including those watching online. And with that, we'll get started with our conversation. We'll start with boat preparation. The Mackinac Race happens in the middle of the season, but for most boat owners and sailors, it's a year-round task to make sure the boat's ready and it's taken care of. And anybody that knows Tim Prophit knows that his approach to boat preparation is, to put it kindly, obsessive. But you can't argue with his results. So Tim, can you tell us a little bit about how you start getting ready for the next season as soon as your boat's out of the water, what you do during the winter, what you do during the spring launch season?
As Kyle said, I'm pretty fanatical about boat prep. And there's a number of reasons why. A well-prepped boat's going to break less, it's going to be faster, and it really helps with crew attraction and retention, because if the crew know that if they don't win, it's not the boat's fault, i.e. the boat can win every race it enters, they're going to be more inclined to choose to sail with me rather than someone else. I'm already working on next year projects. The boat's not out of the water yet. I still have some sailing to do, but every year I send out an email to my crew list, which is about 50 people. And most of those people sail on the boat at least once a year. Many of those people sail on the boat many times during the course of a year. And I asked them, what didn't work? What in your area, your primary area, are some problems? So, some years ago, I took the turning blocks off, and this is just an example where the jib sheets go, and went directly from the car to the primary winches. Well, then I got a new jib, and it hadn't shrunk like the other ones, all right? And so we needed to run the cars back, and especially on sharp attack, going to the port primary, it wasn't a good lead. So where I had removed the turning blocks, because I don't know, they weighed 18 pounds, and I sold them for $250. I had put a paddock, so we were putting snatch blocks in there, and I only carried 2 snatch blocks. And doing a distance race, we were using stays holes and whatnot. Sometimes you need the snatch blocks elsewhere. So I finally got a set of Harkin Millennium blocks, 80 millimeters. I put those on a month ago, and the crew loves it, and we got more room for snatch blocks. Little things like that. Part of boat prep also is eliminating distractions. And there were 3, I won't go through all 3 of them, but we had 3 kind of minor issues that would during a Mackinac race become irritating. And this one sounds so simple, but under the nav station there's 2 drawers, and they've got little wooden cleats underneath them to prevent them from popping out. The boat's 45 years old. The wood that the cleat catches against was worn, and first sailing up wind on port tack, and we hit a wave, the drawer goes flying out. Okay, no big deal, pick it up, throw it back in. Well, it's a distraction. And somebody said, fix the damn doors. So I put 2 more cleats, one on either side where the wood hadn't worn down in 45 years, and we got rid of that distraction. The more significant is I switched to lithium-ion batteries last year, which is a whole other story. But anyways, they worked out well, and we did both the Bayview Mackinac and the Chicago Mackinac without ever once charging batteries, all right? And that's a distraction, all right? because you got to, I close my raw water intake so the bottom is completely smooth. So then I take the keys next to that so I don't accidentally start it and fry a impeller. So so we never charge, right? And that's, all that is seconds saved, or minutes saved. And having lost the Chicago overall by 4 seconds once, and having lost the Bayview Mackinac Race by 12 seconds, I'm very cognizant of the fact that, every second counts. I could go on for hours about boat rep, but I won't.
Thanks, Tim. Did anybody want to add on to that before we move on?
So for me, and Tim, by the way, is a bit excessive, but it's important, right? And Tim, is talking about big picture things that'll happen potentially on the race course, or hopefully not happen on the race course. Your boat needs to be in good repair. Your sails need to be in good repair, or you're subject to failures, right? or distractions, as Tim talked about. Some of the things that I like to think about leading up to the race, and like Tim, I asked my crew, but I also started the week after the last Mackinac, thinking about what worked well, what didn't work well, where we think we can improve from a boat speed standpoint, whether that's sail handling or whether, more importantly, that's some piece of rigging that we might need or something that's not quite as quick to respond as it should be. So those types of things I think are important. And as you lead up to the race, one of the things I like to think about is, okay, every eventuality, what could go wrong, right? So we lose a spinnaker sheet overboard. Got a spare? Same thing with a jib sheet. You got one of those? Not just a short sheet, but something that could actually live the rest of the race as your jib sheet, right? An appropriate shackle if something breaks. And I mean appropriate. Don't just throw a box of hardware on the boat with a hodgepodge. It's heavy, and the thing you're looking for may not be there, right? If you've got a 12 millimeter box wrench in your toolbox and it doesn't fit anything, get rid of it. Go around the boat and figure out what tools fit what. Crescent wrenches are great, but you may be looking for something that needs to get into somewhere. What if you need to bleed the engine, right? Do you know how to do that? Do you have a wrench that's appropriate for that, rather than a pack that weighs 20 pounds? So these are some of the little things I try to do so that I stock the boat appropriately for all the eventualities that may occur without weighing it down with a bunch of things we don't need. And sails, I think, are really important. And I'm not talking about buying new sails necessarily, but make sure your sails are in good shape. Talk to your sailmaker, whether it's a repair, have them assess the sail, whether it needs to be repaired or whether there's some small recut that could happen. All these things can make the boat a little bit faster and hopefully prevent some sort of disaster. So that's the kind of stuff I look for.
I'd like to add, as far as preparation, I like to think about things leading into the race, and eliminating distractions is obviously a big thing. And for me, what I've found to be a big distraction, especially when I was new to being the person in charge and being responsible for everything, there's so many things that have to happen to be prepared for a Mackinac race, whether it's getting your ORC certificate, getting all the safety equipment on the boat, making sure all the maintenance is done on the boat. There were too many times that I would find myself on the Friday night before the race scrambling to finish something. And what would happen was it would lead into the race. I was mentally exhausted on Saturday morning when we were going out to the race course. So what I've done over the years is I've kind of set a time clock for myself and said, okay, I'm going to assume the race actually starts a week early. And my goal is to have the boat in Port Huron, have all the maintenance items done, have all the non-perishables on the boat, so that the day of the race, and really the days leading up to the race, I can be at home on the couch thinking about the race, preparing myself mentally, so when I show up on Saturday morning, I'm really fresh.
Mike, where do you keep all your Coors Light?
It's non-perishable, so it can be put on the boat early.
One more short thing. So as you all know, we raced under the ORC rule, and I would strongly encourage you to have if you're not getting, well, if you get new sails, you obviously have to submit a sales certificate. But if you're using a number one that's more than a year old, they shrink. Get them measured, turn that certificate in, you'll get a couple of, a small rating to your advantage by having a smaller number one. If you're sailing with a club certificate and you haven't gotten fully measured, get fully measured. It'll be the cheapest boat speed you can buy because you're going to pay, what, maybe $1,000 to get measured, all right? And if you get measured versus the default they give you, you're going to end up with a better rating. You can be rated slower, which in effect gives you a better corrected time.
I paid that $1,000 last year and got rated faster, so it's there's no guarantee to it. So what we're talking about up here right now, and I think will be the theme of the whole night, is all kind of one little umbrella, and it reminds me of when I was a kid, 1970 or something like that. Somebody gave me a book by Dr. Stuart Walker called No Excuse to Lose. And that's what you're going to hear tonight is no excuse to lose. Dr. Walker was a doctor, a fantastic sailor, and he was a scientist. And so he analyzed every aspect of the sport, whether it's boat preparation, sail shape, sail preparation, starting, when to tack, when to start on the right side of the line, when to start on the left side of the line. And he came up with rules. And his idea was that this is not a game of chance, it's a game of probability, so let's do what we can do to make the probabilities work best in our favor. And nobody here is going to do everything that we suggest tonight because they picked, especially these four guys, because they're uber anal, and this is what they do and this is what they think about all the time. You're not going to do it, but at the same point in time, do those things that you can do, that you have the help to do it on your boat, that so when the race is over, you can say, well, I lost, but it wasn't because of anything I did. It was because that guy beat me. No shame in getting beat by somebody who beats you. It's a shame when you beat yourself.
Thanks, everyone. The next thing I want to talk about is crewing, because it's another critical component to success. A lot of the people in this room, certainly some of us on the panel, not some of you on the panel, but myself included, spent live sailing with family members. I spent the first half or so of my sailing career sailing with my dad and my brother. Looking back, it was a pleasure. Maybe not so much at the time, but we'll touch on the family thing a little bit later. But I wanted to ask some of our panelists different perspectives about that. And I'll start with Mike Kirkman. You've been sailing for a long time on a couple of different boats. You've had a very consistent crew. How did you guys build that and maintain it?
I think, putting a crew together, there's a lot of variables, and to really be a high-performance crew, there's a lot of things that go into it. There's, skill development. There's making sure you put the right people in the right positions. There's managing interpersonal dynamics. There's a lot of things that go into it, but all those things kind of end up being an issue at some point. But I think really the most important thing is you've got to develop a core. And that core, depending on the size of your boat, it could be 2 people, it could be 3 people. The more, the better. And what I like to see in the people that are part of the core of my crew is really, one, they're passionate about sailing. And when you find people that are really passionate about sailing, you're not going to really have to spend a lot of time trying to convince them to get out sailing. The second thing is you need people that are strongly committed. They're willing to put in a strong commitment. And I think kind of what we've developed over the years on Hot Ticket is kind of a pact between myself and maybe the crew, and that's the crew's committed to make sure that they're going to be out racing every Wednesday. They're going to commit to being out probably as many Saturdays as they can. You can't expect 100% from everybody. And I think in return, my commitment back to them is kind of like Tim said, I'm going to make sure that we're going to put ourselves in the best position to win. I'm going to make sure that we have a very well-prepared boat. I'm going to make sure that it's maintained properly. I'm going to invest in sales. I'm going to make sure that we're going out and we're going to do all the big events. And I think what that does is it kind of creates this cool dynamic between the group of people that are your crew. And everybody kind of is all in. And from the middle of May till the beginning of October, everybody's ready to go out and win. So I think you need to make sure that you can identify who those people would be and get them committed. And really that doesn't even get you on the water. I mean, that's just garnering commitment and effort from people. you've got to find a way to translate that into success on the water. And so the other thing that's really important is you've got to spend time together in the boat. You've got to spend time out, dare I say, practicing. I think practicing is kind of, structured practicing is probably something that's not reality for a lot of people this day and age. It's tough enough just to get out and do racing. So I think with the commitment that I get from my crew and the amount of racing that we do, those really become the practices. And I kind of think of like 3 different traits that really leads to us performing well. And it's consistency, it's coordination, and it's chemistry. And so those 3 things, the consistency aspect, because we're out sailing a lot together, we've really defined how we're going to go in and execute any maneuver on the boat. And we repeat it over and over. We try to simplify things so that as we have crew that may be coming in or out, there's enough knowledge about how we're going to do things on the boat that it really becomes the type of thing where we don't have to communicate a lot. Everybody knows exactly what we're going to do. From a coordination perspective, knowing that what we're going to do, but we also have very well-defined roles and responsibilities. So everybody knows exactly what's required of them, no matter what we're going to do, whether it's a mark rounding, whether it's a tack, whether it's a jibe, whether it's pre-race planning. We have a series of activities that we repeat over and over. And everybody knows their role. They don't step outside of their boundary. We don't have one person doing everything. We don't have people stepping on each other's toes. So I think once you get consistency down on your boat and you've got good coordination, then you can really start seeing the chemistry develop. And the chemistry to me is the thing that really, it's kind of these subtle behaviors that kind of happen on a boat that most people probably wouldn't notice, but it's the type of thing that gets you a boat length here and gets you a boat length there. And some of the things I think about are when you see the main trimmer and you see the jib trimmer working in unison. You know, a puff comes, there's pressure changes, they're working together. You get a spinnaker trimmer and you got a grinder. They kind of get to know their tendencies so they can kind of anticipate when things need to be done. When something goes wrong, because we do things so consistently the same way over and over, when something goes wrong, just about anybody can jump in to help rectify the problem. So I think if you can get to that point, and believe me, it's not easy. It takes a lot of years to get that point, but if you can get the right group of people that are really committed and passionate about sailing, and you spend time in the boat, and you can develop that type of chemistry, you'll end up seeing good things happen.
Thanks. So you could hand the mic to Chris. I wanted to ask him his thoughts on this because the rest of the panel is out just about every Saturday and really sailing hard on weeknights, on weekends. And Chris, on Eliminator, you don't really do that anymore. You guys, well, you and your brother are raising kids. I'm sure some of your crew are doing the same thing. You're just in a different spot in life, but you still do really well. You get people to go do the Bermuda race. A lot of them are the same guys that do Mackinac with you. How has that worked out? How have you been able to maintain the success, even though you're not out there doing it every weekend?
Yeah, so our boat is owned by 2 families, the Van Vossi family and the Van Tol family. So right there, a 35-foot boat, 8-person crew. Consistently for the last 30 plus years, we've got half the crew covered right there between the 2 families. The other 5 interchanging depending on what's going on with life events and the other guys on the boat are just a group of guys that grew up together in the junior sailing program back in the 90s. So that's just kind of been one of those traditions that we've stuck together with our group of 5 and the rest of the family in that it's a part of summer to sail the Mackinac Race. And then, as you said, we've sailed the Newport to Bermuda race every year, for the last 3 campaigns, if you will. And, it takes time on the water. We haven't had the best result with the Newport to Bermuda race, but, there's a learning curve to it. With the family boat that we've got, wasn't until the 10th year that we sailed the race that we won our first class. So time on the water, experience sailing with guys that you've consistently sailed with, as Mike said, building that chemistry is certainly part of the game.
Thanks. And then before we move on, Chuck, you recently became a boat owner again after a hiatus, but you kind of hit the ground running, winning a lot of races. So how did you jump into it after taking a break, put a crew together? And the other thing I want to ask is, when you look at crewing, is your crew from Mackinac different than your Saturday crew?
So, yeah, it was actually a long break, and I sailed with others on various boats, and for a while there I wasn't sailing, on Saturdays and DOA and so forth for quite a number of years, kind of working on being a single parent at that time. But I continued to do Mackinac races and, had close contacts and close crew that I felt comfortable with. I gotta say, it was difficult. When I bought my boat, I knew it wasn't gonna be here till May. And, I was already looking at Mackinac. That was it for that summer. That was going to be my event. If I was going to get the boat out to do, I'd already said I was doing the bob with somebody else, for example. So if I was going to get the boat out on Saturdays, that was my practice. And I was trying to get people excited to go with me, and it was a little difficult. I mean, I was fortunate enough, or have been fortunate enough, to sail with some of the best sailors in the city for years and years and years. And if I go back to the guys that, I grew up sailing with, I was the young guy. I was the bow guy. And I got to know all these people. And it was wonderful because I learned a tremendous amount. But a lot of those guys that would have been my first go-to call are either retired or, heaven forbid, passed away. So I had to go searching a little bit for some crew. The first thing I did was call two of my older shipmates, if you will, and grab them right away. And then you sort of say, okay, now who have I sailed with around here, special regattas, match racing, those types of things. And I came down to the bar and started talking up my new boat. I got a brand new one coming. I had sails. They know me, I know them. My plan is to win the Mackinac Race, and I was fortunate enough to get a couple more signed up, and then it becomes much easier. They suggested people that they've sailed with. And pretty soon I had a crew. But it was hard to go practicing. I'd been out of it for a long time, and that same group that was committed to going on the Mackinac Race in June, I couldn't get them all on the boat for a race. So you took what you could get. The next week I'd get two of the ones that didn't come the week before, and we just kind of did that and got familiar with the boat at the same time, and we're fortunate enough to put together probably one of the best groups I've sailed with. That doesn't always happen. In the meantime, it's been something where I've taken a little bit of Commodore Prophit's playbook and just start expanding your circle and start saying, okay, I know a lot of people. What the heck have they been doing for the last 15 years? So I can give one of them a call. And he'd tell me who he'd been sailing. Well, I don't know that guy. Well, when he come along, sure, bring him along. And just start expanding and finding out who the guys you do know, who have they been sailing with? Who do they like to sail with? Do they have suggestions of people that might want to come along? And I can tell you that by the time the end of this season rolled around, I've got a spreadsheet with probably 50 people on it that I would have no problem calling. It's just the way it is these days. I can't get 6 of the same guys on the boat 4 weeks in a row. And I only need 6 or 7 it depends on what you're doing. Windward Lewards, I need, 7. 8 would be great, depending on what's going on. But I can't get that many to come sailing every single week. It's not going to happen. So I just feel like you just need to keep expanding your circle, and if you can get them locked in early and say, okay, what can you do? Well, I can do these 3 races. Great. Now you know where you stand, and you've got to fill in for the other 2 that you want to do elsewhere. Having a nucleus, like Mike said, is fantastic. I try to fill, the guys that I know and I trust, and from the from sort of the middle of the boat out. I don't want to say back of the boat, because it's important to have guys that can work at both ends and that understand both ends. And I try to go about it that way. And if I can get 2 or 3 of those guys on and committed to a program, then I feel like you've got not only me bringing people in, but they can bring people in. And just keep expanding that circle. It's not easy these days to get, a committed group of 6 or let alone 8. They're going to sail every single Saturday. I just don't think it's going to happen. I mean, Tim's got probably the biggest pool of crew I've ever seen. And I'm guessing you don't have the same guys on the boat every week.
No.
Right. So keep getting your pool bigger and bigger and keep hounding these people. Lots of communication.
That's great, thanks.
let me add a couple of things to that. So, I mentioned my crew list of over 50 people, and Chuck's there now. Just as an indication of how important it is to have a deep bench, if you will, is we did this last year. We did the Bayview Mackinac, the Chicago Mackinac, and the Trans-Superior Race. I sailed with a crew of 10. 17 different people sailed on the boat in those 3 races, and 5 people did all 3 races. So the other 12 people rotated in and out. And I will also say this. I spent, my bottom end of my boat's perfect, by the way. I spent way more time getting crew for each race I do than I spent on the bottom of my boat, all right? My 2024 Bayview Mackinac crew is already set. My 2024 Chicago Mackinac crew is almost already set. And my bad crew is already set, all right? So if you try and poach my crew for next year, they're going to say, nope, sorry.
Thanks, Tim. You can hold on to that, Greg. One of the unique things about our sport that I mentioned earlier was sailing with family, and a lot of our panelists have done that, but I wanted to start with Greg. You started sailing with your father and some of your siblings, and now you sail with one of your sons all the time. If you're lucky, you get a couple of them. Are there any high points or low points you can talk about sailing with family?
Well, on balance, sailing with family is excellent. My dad was... he was a neurosurgeon, and he started sailing when he was 45 years of age and did his first Mackinac race when he was 49 years of age. And coming from an operating room with stab wounds and gunshot wounds and motorcycle accidents, the last thing he wanted to do was go out there and be ultra competitive. And I was just a young kid at the time. I didn't know any better. I started sailing the same day that he did. And what I learned as I got a little bit older and I started sailing with different programs and started sailing with different friends was, no, this is, there needs to be a motor to these crews. There needs to be a driver. Often it's the owner, but often it's not. I've gotten to a point in my life where Kyle, my son, and Joe Brennan, they're my motor. All I have to do is write checks anymore. But it took a long time to get here. So family can be a burden. That's a bad word for it. Family can be an impediment to a winning program if they are not of the same mindset and interest and passion that you need to be to win often. Now, so that's kind of the downside of it. The good side of it is you have, a tree grows branches, and when you have family, those branches become twigs and you spread a long way. I had the good fortune of sailing with John Trost for many years and owning that boat with him for many years, and he had 3 sons. I had 4 sons. So that's 7. Talking about doing the numbers, that's 9 right there. We sailed with 10 to 12 on that boat. And I got to tell you, when Kevin started when he was very young, and on that boat, he was almost useless. He was 14 or 15 years old. The sails weighed 125 pounds each. The primary winches were big as a bass drum. I mean, there was literally nothing that he could do, and you've got to. So for those young people, you've got to do something to keep their interest. If they go out and they bob around with you for 8 hours and they come back and their mom says, "What'd you do?" "I just sat there." That's your problem. So find things that they do. They can coil lines. They can run to the cooler for you and not upset. Only weigh 80 pounds. They're not going to upset the trim of your boat. Beer fetching weasel is what we called Kevin for years when he was that age. And now you're going to start sailing, particularly in overnight races. I think I'd be reluctant to take anyone younger than 13 years of age, but 13, 14, they're going to be of limited assistance to you, and then you will see if they keep doing it and they blossom into a sailor unto themselves. And then what happens with them? They bring their friends. So now this root ball that Trost and I started, now it's gotten a little bigger. Now it's spreading out to their friends, and that's exactly where most of my crew nowadays comes from. They're a friend of my sons and John's sons, and they've been very dedicated. They've been with us a long time. So having family is great. Now, let me give you one other little thing I suggest if you want to keep your crew engaged in the game. And John and I started doing this a number of years ago, and I still do it on the boat that I have now, is let them take ownership. Let them use the boat. If they are ready to use a boat on their own and go out with their friends, let them. You know, they might stub the keel on something, scratch a little paint. You can get by that. But once they have this ability to use that boat with permission, and, you know, in moderation, they become de facto owners of the boat. And owners of the boat love taking care of a boat. They love making it ready for a race. They like racing it, and it's everything you need in a crew. So that's my one suggestion. Get your crew involved and let them use the boat.
Thanks, Greg. And you can pass that mic down to Mike Kirkman. Mike, you also started sailing with your dad. You sail with your kids. You sail with your wife. I know she's here, so I won't ask you to get yourself in trouble. But do you have anything to add to what Greg had to say about sailing with family?
Yeah, I mean, I've been very fortunate having grown up sailing since I was a little kid. My dad bought his first boat in the mid-'70s kind of on a whim. He didn't really know anything about sailing. So it was kind of interesting growing up, my brother and I sailing with him, because it wasn't necessarily something that was handed down. We kind of all learned to sail together, which was, I find, kind of cool. But like you said, I met my wife sailing. I tell all single sailors that if they want to continue to sail uninterrupted for the rest of their life, they need to find a girl that sails and marry her. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves at home quite a few Saturdays. And then obviously I have two boys, and it's been fantastic being able to share the sport with them over the last 20 years. Trish and I are just recently empty nesters, so we've kind of made it through the full circle, but certainly nothing better than sailing with family. One benefit for sure is when they're young, you can throw them up on the bow, and they really can't fight you on it. We know how hard it is to get bow guys, but I haven't really had any real issues with, yelling or screaming or getting in fights. My wife does trim the manual, so she sits right next to me. So things can get a little colorful every once in a while, but for the most part, it's fantastic.
Awesome. Did anybody else want to add something to that piece? Chris, we'll go Chris first, then Tim.
Yeah, I just want to add that, everything that Greg Thomas was mentioning in terms of being the nice parent that lets the child take the boat out. I'm a product of that. Bruce Van Busty and my dad were nice enough to say, go ahead, you 17-year-olds, if you want to take the boat out and go sailing until midnight with all of your friends, have at it. So there's certainly a lot to be said in that. If you have enough trust and responsible enough young adults, you let them go.
Actually, I'll tell you a quick story about the Red Dot Spanker. It's kind of family related, and it was actually inspired by the Mackinac Race. My mother was probably the most devoted person to the hot ticket program early on. She loved to chase my dad around to all the races that he went to, and one of her favorite things to do every year was to camp out at Mission Point and with her chair and her binoculars and look out over the horizon and watch all the boats coming in and anxiously await for my dad to hit the island. And it only took a couple of years where she got really, really frustrated because she realized there's a lot of boats out there with just plain white sails. And there were a couple of instances where we sailed right past her, went to the finish and docked the boat, and she had no idea. And back then there were no trackers, and I remember even before I started sailing, the only indication you had of where boats were, the race committee at some point would bring out a list of Cove Island roundings with times, and so you kind of had to look at what boats were finishing and see where they were relative to each other at Cove Island. So I could see how it was easy for her to miss because she'd be out there all night waiting. What came out of that was my dad, he worked with, I can't remember if it was Al or Bob DeClerc, and so we got to find a solution to this problem. And so somehow they came up with the idea to put a red dot on the spinnaker so that my mom could see us as we were coming over the horizon. And I don't think she ever missed another finish after that.
And that's the secret. Thanks, Mike.
So I just wanted to point out that Mike here has probably executed the most successful poaching of one of my crew ever. Trish used to sail with me on the Santana 35. She won her first 4 Mackinac races on that boat, then she started dating Mike.
One question I just want to run by all you guys to see what you have to say about it. Obviously, everybody would love to have 8, 9, 10, 11 crew that can all do everything really well, but that's impossible. What is your approach to, hey, I want to have an expert trimmer that maybe doesn't even know how to put a handle in a winch, or a really, really good jib trimmer who's never touched the helm? I mean, how do you balance having jacks of all trades versus so-called experts? Anybody have any thoughts on that?
You know, it's, I think that most people gravitate to what they want to do. You know, I saw a thing on Facebook last night. Yeah, I look at the stupid thing. And it was Commodore Rick Bro congratulating Bill Henderson, who the two of them did, you know, God knows, maybe 40, 50 Mackinac races together, on his impending marriage. And he was complimenting on what a fine crew Bill was, and I've sailed with Bill, and he is, but this guy just gravitates towards trimming spinnakers. He's a world-class spinnaker trimmer. He insists on being the best. He will do it, as Rick said last night, sometimes you have to pry his hands off the sheet to get him away from it. But you will find that most people will gravitate to something. We have a couple of people on our boat that are dedicated to the art. It's an art of trimming a mainsail. You know, you don't just cleat that thing and go. That's not working, guys. That needs to be worked pretty much all the time. Everything needs to be worked all the time. You know, naturally, if you've got big, powerful winches, you're going to put one of your stronger guys on that. You know, your bow guy is not going to be me or Kyle. So there's a certain amount of physical attributes to go with these jobs, and which will help people gravitate to where they want to go. But I think if you let them taste everything, you will quickly learn what it is that they want to do and what they do best.
So most of my crew are jacks of all trades, but like Greg said, they tend to gravitate to what they excel at. I like to say we typically have 4 helmsmen out of a crew of 10. The reality is we have 8 or 9 people on the boat that can drive. We have 3 primary head sail trimmers, but there's another 4, 5, 6 people that can trim head sails. I personally haven't touched a head sail on my boat in years. I either drive, or I do tactics, or I trim main. Why? Because I'm not the best jib trimmer on my boat. I'm like 3rd or 4th in line, and I'm probably 3rd or 4th in line in spinnaker trim. Our bow people tend to be bow specialists, but they know how to do other things as well. And later on, when we talk about the watch system that we use, you know, I try to have as opposites people who have the same or very similar skill sets, so that every single hour we've got, you know, roughly the same skill set on deck.
I think having a cross-trained crew is really, really important, especially in a Mackinac race. There's certainly instances when you're doing buoy races and maybe you're in a bob where you want to have, you know, the best people in their best position. But on a Mackinac, it's such a long race. I think if you don't have people cross-trained, you may find yourself as with a bow guy that's sitting on a rail because you've been on starboard tack all the way to Cove Island. And you want everybody in the crew to be engaged. So I think if you can set up a system where people are rotating through positions, maybe not everybody's a driver, but certainly everybody can trim a spinnaker. You can certainly train people to trim the main. In fact, the Mackinac Race is a great time to teach new people to trim the main. So to me, I think it's vitally important.
I don't have the diverse group that Tim does, and like I said, I tried to I call on my friends and people I've sailed with for a long time, and I start at the top, and I try to get people that can do everything. But honestly, I try to get the best sailors. That's where I start. I try to get the guys that I know have a good feel for the race, can drive, can trim, have a good feel for the wind, and that normally translates into guys that can do just about anything, especially if they're at the right age. So in 2022, I went, as Kyle mentioned, we won the overall, and I didn't have a bowman per se. I made the head sail change from the 1 to the 3. But I had a couple of guys that could certainly do so, and could do just about anything else, and I had good helmsmen. Last year I had one of the best bowmen in the city with me. He would hate for me to say that, but I did. He's a little older now, but he's still probably one of the best bowmen I know. And I didn't take him in the race to do the bow. I ended up being glad he was there, but I had another guy that was really, his job was the bow, and we had a group that could kind of rotate through and could trim, could drive, and could certainly move into whatever position needed to happen. I'm really lucky that way, and if you're building a crew from the ground up, you're going to end up with people that are sort of purpose built to start off with before they get, as Mike said, cross trained. I didn't really have time for that, and I just kind of called the guys that I knew that could do just about anything, and was fortunate enough to get 4 or 5 of them to come along. So that's how it worked for me.
Chris, do you have something to add?
Yeah. Just, on our boat, I think we've got a well-rounded crew, and kind of like everybody else, everybody jack of all trades, everybody's a pretty good trimmer, and, we have 4 guys on the boat that are very capable of driving. We're very cognizant about not leaving anybody on the wheel for too long. We're switching off certainly every 3 hours, and if you're baking in the sun, it might be even less than that. And then the other thing is, we've got a great bow guy in Tim Kelly, and I think having a strong bow person is probably a little bit underrated. If there's times where you're sailing straight line, conditions are remaining same for hours on end, but if you've got fickle conditions, super light air, and you're doing 3 or 4 sail changes within a 30-minute period, having that bow person that's capable of doing that, and especially in light air, you can certainly make gains and distance on the competition in what are frustrating conditions, but it's pretty important.
Great, thanks. Moving on from crewing, we all look forward to the Mackinac Race, if not immediately after the one you're doing is over, but certainly after a couple of weeks, you're looking forward to next year. For me, when I really start to get excited is about a week before the race, when you can start to think about the weather. And Tim, I was hoping you could share with us how you or your crew, how and when do you start looking at the weather and developing kind of a game plan for the race? You pass the mic down.
Thank you. So I wrote a note to Kyle. We were discussing, we actually did a little preparation for this, and so I just copied and pasted what I wrote because Kyle liked it. Kyle, I know it's Kyle. Anyway, so about 10 days before the race, 3 or 4 of us, we start looking at the weather. We use a variety of forecast models. We use a variety of routing programs, and we don't really discuss amongst ourselves what we're doing. We're just kind of off on our own doing it until about 4 or 5 days before the race. And then we start talking to see what sort of consistency we're seeing, what sort of weirdness we're seeing. And we're trying to see if all the various weather models, the various forecasts, the various routing tools that we use show us a consensus or show us something that's divergent. The past couple of years, it's been a consensus, so we haven't had to deal with, we got 2 wildly different scenarios here, which one's going to play out. All right, but so once we find that consistency, and sometimes it is until the day before or even the morning of the race, then we talk about, okay, which end of the line do we want to start on, okay? And I've heard it said by some people, I don't believe this, that it doesn't really matter how you start, it's a long race. That's not true. If you feel it's to your advantage to be to the right of your class when you start, then win the right side of the start. If it's to your advantage to be to the left of the fleet, you know, an hour into the race, start on the left-hand side of the starting line. You know, in last year's Bayview Mackinac Race, we believed the right side was the place to be, and we thought we were going to win the right side of the start. And John Burke came down in Manitou, and I thought he was barging, but he cleared my transom by his transom cleared my bow by inches, and all of a sudden, I'm overtaking boat on giveaway. So I was faster than him, so I had to dive down, set my cut after the start to leeward, and we had a better kite set than John did. So I had given myself enough room. We put the pole in the headstay, we had a symmetric on, and we went hard up to get to the right of him, and also out of the corner of my eye, I saw the two J109s who have symmetric chutes also fighting up to the right. And so we just kept our S2 pole in the headstay for a good 12, 15 minutes until the J109s finally gave up and turned down. So it took us a minute, but we won the right side of the course, which is where we wanted to be, and we won overall, so it wasn't a bad move. And a lot of that had to do with what we saw with the weather. A lot of times, far more so in the Chicago race than our race, but the weather that greets us Saturday morning is completely different from that which has been forecast. So when that happens, we have to decide, okay, did the weather we've been seeing all week, did what we think was going to happen speed up, or did it slow down? And once we figure that out, we react accordingly. But when all else fails, if whistling is weird, until you figure it out, just get north as fast as you can.
Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so, you know, we start looking at weather, and I'm not sure that we should, at least on our boat, the week of the race. And it seems like as the week progresses, forecasts are always changing. So, you know, with our boat, it's the night before, it's certainly the morning of, that we kind of get a bit of an idea of the big picture and the game plan that we're going to take out there. And usually, you know, more often than not, the timing, as Tim said, of the weather changes, so you've got to be aware of that. You've got to be ready to abandon whatever original plan you had the night before. We're sailing out there in July, right? So storm cells, wind crapping out, whatever it may be, whatever original plan that you've had, you've got to be ready to adapt out there on the water as things change.
I would say I'm kind of in the camp of, I'll look at the long range forecasts, you know, a week or two out, but I don't put a whole lot into it. Kind of more in maybe the Thursday night before the race will be the first time I actually run a model. Because I've seen it change so drastically, I'll drive myself nuts if I look too far ahead. But as far as models are concerned, kind of like Tim said, you know, when the models are all in alignment, that's a real good indication of where you need to set your strategy. And that's probably the only time I'm willing to really deviate off sailing too far away from the run line. If the models are all over the place, you're gonna see us kind of pointing the boat as close as we can to the mark and keeping an eye on the competition.
I normally relegate a couple of people to look at the weather, look at the models. I don't do it really myself anymore until maybe, you know, 2, maybe a little bit 3 days out. What I don't like is a lot of banter 5, 6 days out about what might happen on Saturday. I find that to be counterproductive, and people are thinking about things that they really don't need to think about. The only value that I get out of it, and I normally talk to the people that are looking at it, and they're taking snapshots. This isn't something they're doing for hours every night. It's just we're trying to figure out how these systems are moving, and if they're starting to go faster than they were predicted, or starting to go slower as they were predicted, as Tim mentioned. And that's That's really important. It doesn't mean that come Saturday morning, you're going to know where we are. It's the Great Lakes. The system can look like it's been moving slowly, and by the time you wake up Saturday morning, it's on its horse and moving. And you're not going to know that until you get out in the race course. But it gives you some idea, and some idea of the trend and what's likely, what likely scenarios might take place. Now the question is, does that take place 5 hours from now or 10 hours from now? So I think it's important, but I don't think it's important to have a lot of conversation and have the crew focused on that type of business, 4, 5, 6 days out. I think there's just way too much that can change, and they ought to be focused on other things about how to make the boat go fast. For me, Rome line's nice. The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. We all know that. I'm typically much more focused on VMC. Meaning I'll sacrifice 5 degrees, 10 degrees here or there to make the boat go fast enough through the water that I'm getting, as Tim said, north. Fair enough, getting into that next rung of the ladder or that concentric circle so that when something does change, I'm closer to the mark than the fellow who's just decided he's just going to point straight at the mark. You have to be careful with that, but I think it's a good strategy, and that's typically what I fall back on. When in doubt, make the boat go as fast as it can to get up into that next rung of the ladder.
I just want to add one thing, 2 things here. Probably the most important metric we look at is VMC, because that tells us how we're doing towards the mark. But none of us have yet mentioned weather during the race. So there's all the obvious stuff, the marine radio. When you have yellow brick and you're within cell range, you can look at the other boats and see how fast they're moving. And if you see a Santa Cruz 70s doing 3 knots, there's no wind over there. All right. We had for Chicago and Trans-Superior, one of my crew had an Iridium Go and a little display so you could download current grid files and see actual weather that was forecast, a more updated forecast. The other thing that's nice is if you're out in the middle of the lake and you don't have cell service and you don't have a satellite phone, if you do have an AIS receiver, you can look at all the other boats that are within 3 or 4 miles of you, which isn't a great length, but you can see how fast they're going. And then, if they're a boat that they're doing the speed they should be, they've got pressure. If they're going slower than they should be, that there's not pressure. So there's a number of different tricks out there to get current weather, and we try to use every one we can.
I don't want to speak down to anybody, but we're spitting out this modeling thing, and I just want to make sure everybody knows what this modeling is. There's a number of entities throughout the world that prepare forecasts. What's going to happen in 6 hours? They prepare them for the whole world, and they download them for free in these things called grid files. .grb is their suffix, and I don't know, when you get about half a dozen that are applicable and generally pretty good for the area. So, as you're moving into the race, and I'm with Chuck absolutely on the 5 and 6 days out. He sends me these pictures every day of the weather. 5 days out. I'm not looking at that. Really, it's that Friday and Saturday that makes it. So you get these grids and you download them and you will get models, and the models will be different. One of them say the front's going faster, one will say going slower. And a lot of times they agree, that's what I'm going to do. Sometimes they don't. Now you have to make a judgment about what you want to do with this. Now, again, in the no excuse to lose category, an option that is available that I've taken advantage for is I got a satellite phone. Cost me about $2,000 getting it in, and we turned it on for the month of July only, which not very much money. And as we're bobbing around out there, we can download these active grips. So not only do we have an idea of what was projected to happen before the start of the race, but as we're ratcheting ourselves north, we have those same things. We have a laptop on board with a program called Expedition, and an Expedition is pretty expensive, and irrespective of how expensive it is, it's tremendously complicated to use. You have to get a crew member who's really dedicated to using and understanding this. I have one. And you download your boat's polars, which you can get when you get an ORC certificate. You can get the polars for your boat, which tells what your projected best speed is for given wind angles and velocities and sails. You put those in the program. You download the gribs, and now the grib gets the expedition program, depending on which grib file you are using, gives you a, hey, here's your best course to Cove Island, turn left and go to Mackinac Island. And it changes all the time. So it's data is all it is. And you know, I can't remember who told me when I first started thinking about expedition, but it might have been Bob. But it was don't rely on it. It's just a tool. Don't just blindly do what expedition tells you to do, because you're going to lose more races than you win if you do. It's not that kind of a program. It's something that gives you another tool as the race is going on to keep yourself updated on what the wind's going to be like and how your boat should best perform in those conditions. So those are, when they're talking about looking at models, that's where they're talking about downloading those files.
Thanks. I had some questions that already got answered, talking about how do you get weather information during the race, how do you adapt your game plan when things don't work out the way they should. But one thing I wanted to talk about and ask some of you guys about, because it's one of the more frustrating things we deal with. You know, you work your butt off the entire first day of a Mackinac Race, you build a nice lead, and the wind dies. And now everybody's coming up from behind. Or you think you're doing really well because you're sailing up on a giant clump of boats, only to realize there's no wind there. And the whole race is a restart. All the hard work you put in is thrown out the window. Greg, why don't I start with you? How do you handle those when you run into an area of absolutely no wind? How do you keep going and power through that?
All right. Well, you can be running into it, or and stopping, or you can be stopped and boats are catching up to you. They're both kind of bad things. But it's going to happen. I don't know that I've sailed a few races where the wind was blowing a gagger pretty much the whole time. But if you have weather systems coming and going, you're going to have transitions that are going to seem like there's no air. I personally believe that there's almost never no wind. Air, that's better. We speak of air, but you know what I mean. So when that happens, you know, you have to understand, and your crew has to be prepared to understand that this is part of the gig. You know, this is sailboat racing. Get that frown off your face. You know, do everything that you're doing just a little bit harder, because this is where this really gets challenging. I think the most important part of a restart or running into a hole or whatever you want to call it, we have lots of terms for it, is to keep your boat moving. And these guys all know this, and I know a lot of these guys know this, but there's a deadly weapon in your arsenal for when there's no wind, and it's called a wind seeker. And what a wind seeker does, a little tiny sail, and it's intuitively, you know, backwards, how can this make me go faster? Well, a smaller sail is easy for the wind to attach to and keep the laminar flow going, and therefore it's a more efficient wing, other than a big number one kind of wrinkly and flopping back and forth. And a wind seeker can be one that's specially made for the boat. They do make those. It can be a stay sail. The Beneteau with 36.7s, and this always pissed me off when I sailed on them, they use a number 3, which I just thought, come on, you buy a wind seeker, it lasts for 50 years. I mean, it's amortized, you know, $10 a year, but they didn't have them. They didn't have them. But gear yourself down into something that the wind can play with a little bit more effectively. And then if you use a wind seeker and you use it effectively, it takes you several years to get to the point where you understand I got to put up a smaller sail to go faster in light air. And then the next brain fart you have is you get that thing going, and lo and behold, that boat starts accelerating, and all of a sudden you're going 1 knot. And when you're going 1 knot and you're going faster, the guy's going 0, you're slaying the guy, okay? So that's good. You're going 1 knot. The boat heels over just a little bit, and the weight's all on that side. Everybody goes, oh man, you hear the water kind of making a little noise. And everybody goes, take that down and put up the number 1, and you stop. You stop. So believe in your wind seeker. If you don't have one, or you don't know what sail you want to use, talk to your sailmaker. They can all help you out on that.
Anyone else?
The wind seeker's a magic sail. And yes, I use my staysail as a wind seeker, and if we're trying to go upwind, we tack it right up at the tack instead of mid-bow. The other thing we do, this is irrespective of what the wind's doing, but we gear shift, all right? So the backstay gets let off, main halyard gets eased, everything gets eased, power, power, power. I have a boat that's got a pretty fat butt, and or a fat beam and a narrow butt, and it has a lot of wetted surface, and so we've got everybody sitting on the low side of the boat near the shrouds, you know, either totally silent or talking quietly amongst themselves, but absolutely do not disturb the boat, because if you're doing 4/10 of a knot and the other guy's doing 0, you're crushing them, all right? And it takes a long time to get that laminar flow on the foils, and you know, like Greg said, you go in a knot, you want to change. Our rule is you got to be doing a knot and a half and accelerating for at least a minute before you can think about putting a 1 or a spinnaker on.
Are we talking about restarts or lighter sailing? I'm confused. Yes?
I mean,
Okay,
sometimes
I could comment on both. So just I mean, I guess my first thing about restarts, if that's what you want to call them, if you find yourself in a predicament where you've run out of breeze and the guys are coming from behind you, it's frustrating, right? There's not much you can do about that. If you can see guys coming with pressure, it's probably not going to do you any good to pout. All you can do is try to get out of there. But the fact of the matter is, until some sort of breeze gets to you, if there's a big difference between what they're sailing up with, they're going to catch you. And I think that at least they're going to close the gap until you can get moving. And I think for me, one of the most important things to understand is that these types of situations happen with some regularity, and the last thing you can do is get discouraged by it. If it happened to you, it can happen to them. And you really got to fight through this and do all the things that these guys have been talking about to make your boat go as fast as you can in the wind that you have, until such time as you start to get into the same kind of breeze that they have and you're all moving again. But work the boat. You're going to go through another 6 hours, another 7 hours. The same thing can happen in reverse, and they're going to slow down, or they're going to stop working, or something will change. So just stay on your game. Look for the next opportunity to excel, and whether that means you're going in a direction where you see more wind, or whether it just means you're sailing your boat harder than the next guy. Don't give up on that, because these things happen, and you still have a whole day to go. We've all seen plenty of indications in Mackinac races, or plenty of situations in Mackinac races where a day can mean miles and miles of distance between you and another boat.
I would second pretty much everything that these guys said, specifically keeping the boat moving. It's very frustrating when the boat hits 000s and you've got to try and get it going again in a half a knot of breeze. But I guess what I would add to that is, nowadays with the tools that are available to us, specifically the trackers, you can find a way out of finding yourself in one of those situations where you pile up behind another set of boats that are completely stopped. A couple of years ago in the Chicago Mackinac Race, we unfortunately were behind quite a bit in our class. In fact, I think one of the boats was like 10 miles ahead of us. And because we were actively watching the tracker, we could see every boat that had entered the Manitous was completely stopped. And we, being 10 miles behind, it gave us an opportunity. We actually sailed about 20 degrees higher course for a couple hours and got out into the lake. And by the time the next 4-hour shift had gone by, we had made up that 10-mile gap. So I guess what I'm saying is, with the tools that we have today, there's a likelihood that you can try and avoid those situations.
I'm going to try to kind of reiterate what Mike said. Light air and the wind turning off for a restart can certainly be defeating and or frustrating if you're in the lead. It's exciting if you're from behind, coming in from behind. But light air and the wind turning off are passing lanes. If you're just going along at 8 knots on a broad reach, you're just kind of playing follow the leader. So I think you've got to, when they happen, embrace it and look at it as an opportunity.
Thanks, Chris. Before we move on, it wouldn't be a Bayview event if we didn't patronize the bar. So let's take a 5-minute break. If our panelists are trying to get a drink, please let them cut in front of you in line. If you're watching at home, grab yourself a beverage, use the head. We'll be back in 5 minutes.
I might go over there. Somebody made a comment about me being able to hear people that live in the car. So I'm gonna, since we're taking a break. I don't know. I'm afraid if I finish it, that it will make a lot of difference. So I'm gonna do that. Yeah, it's just so I was just gonna wait till they're. Yeah, comments or any questions. Right now, 134. I've seen as high as 148. Yeah, I don't know. It hasn't really gone down.
So basically, it's got a pin outside, it comes in, it boxes.
Lots of viewers. So what Jennifer's doing right here
Really?
We're going to get going here. Grab money in the bar or the bathroom. We'll get started here again. We get our panelists up there.
Yeah, because he was.
Well, I want to say, in case people chime in.
Got a lot of knowledgeable people and a lot of knowledge to share. So 2 hours from Yeah, we'll get started. I know people are still filing in. But moving on, one of my favorite parts of the Mackinac Race is sailing at night. And talk to a lot of people, and they think, oh, it must be so peaceful and so cool. I see the stars and this and that. And we do know a lot of people during the race, they relax a little bit. It's hard to see what's going on around you. Sail changes might take a little bit longer. But on the other side of that, there's people that think that that's when you put the pressure on even harder. In fact, during the Chicago race this year, my friend and Greg's son, Kevin, looked at me and said, "The nighttime is my friend." And that's when he earned the very apt title, Prince of Darkness. Chuck, what do you do to make sure that you don't take the night off and keep your crew pressing hard during the Mackinac Race at nighttime?
I'm not sure I know exactly how to answer that, other than to start with sort of my experience. That I learned at a very, very young age from some really, really good sailors, a little bit about sailing at night. And my first experiences with some of these guys was on a Cal 25 with no lights and flashlight. But we didn't have trim lights per se. There was nothing aiming at the telltales. We didn't have a masthead light. We didn't have a light in the knot meter. We didn't have a light in the compass. You just had the boat and, your flashlight to look at the sail every once in a while. What I learned from those guys was that a lot of this is, I'm going to get beyond this quickly, but there is an aspect of using your senses and feeling the boat, right? It's different if it's blowing 20 versus blowing 8. But in general, I think you want a quiet boat. And what I mean by that is not just everybody talking, although that's part of it. That can be very distracting, but not a lot of movement. And that's true in the daylight hours too, but at night, people tend to become complacent. They don't quite have the same focus. They may want to move around and get, well, I'm bored, it's nighttime, and I want to get a pop, or I want to get something, to eat, or whatever the case would be. Every time somebody moves on the boat or puts their weight in the wrong spot, the helmsman can certainly feel it, the boat knows it, and you're either distracted and or going slow, right? Just for a little bits of time, but it means something. So I think it's important for everybody sort of to find their groove where they're going to sit, put the weight in the proper place. That means if you got guys sleeping and they're on the wrong side of the boat, wake them up and make them move. Okay, just those little things, decide to stay focused, I think mean a lot. The boat doesn't want a lot of movement and doesn't want a lot of distraction for your helmsman and your sail trimmers. I think for me that's really important. The other aspects are trying to just get in tune with what aids that you do have. Now we've all got target boat speeds, we've all got instruments that are lit up, we've got masthead units. I mean, I could go on for a long time about how to steer a boat and what kind of the numbers and kind of the feel that I use, going through my brain on an almost continuous basis. Normally it comes down to maybe 3 of these sensors that I'm using. Boat speed's number 1, right? Got to keep the boat going fast. Work with your trimmers. Sometimes I like to make the groove of the boat a little bit wider, making it even a little bit easier to steer, a little bit easier to sail, especially in lumpy conditions, because I'd rather be going, 95% of my target boat speed for 70% of the time versus, going 98% for 20% of the time, and 80% for the rest of it. If it's easier to sail and easier to keep going through the water, I think that goes a long way in the lumpy conditions, and especially at night. I'm probably going on and on here. This is something that's kind of dear to me, and I work really hard at it. And I think that's a key, right? When it gets dark, it's difficult for everybody, you know, including those of us who enjoy doing it. So you really have to be conscious about working extra hard at it. I think so. I find myself always trying to go the extra leg, take another look at that sail, work with your trimmer. Am I getting the extra tenth out of the boat speed that I should be? Am I sailing the right wind angle? All these things are going on all the time. And I just think you just got to keep working.
Tim, anything to add to that?
So this is going to sound kind of trite, but it's true. Sailing at night is just like sailing in the day, only it's dark out. And the reason I say that is, you know, yeah, we turn the lights on. Check your prescription, Chuck, I don't know. I mean, we turn the lights on, you know, the instruments dim automatically, we get trim lights going, but we haven't gotten into watch schedules yet, but we run a Swedish watch system on Fast Tango, and so a new person comes up every hour, and we do that really to maintain continuity, so that, you know, when the new guy comes up, there's 4 other people that have been up there for 1 to 3 hours, and so what we're doing and how we're doing it doesn't get interrupted by a wholesale crew change. And so, you know, we keep a quiet boat. I mean, kind of the rule of my boat is, anyways, there's no conversation unless it's about the sailboat race that we're currently racing. And that's in the cockpit. I know people on the rail will sit and chat, and that's fine as long as we don't hear it in the cockpit, or it's not a distraction for anybody. So at nighttime, there's, as Chuck said, there's more conversation between the driver and the trimmers. You know, Chuck's right, you can't really see the water in front of you as well, so the helmsmen have to get a groove, get a feel for the sea state, and steer accordingly. And yes, it's better to sail a little faster than you know, pinch and go slower, hit a brake and slow down. But the other thing, you know, if you're in a you know, a cloudy night and there's no transom lights on your bow to steer off of, and there's not a star to steer off of, sometimes, I mean, you can drive 20 minutes and you start thinking about going in circles because you get squirrely. And one of the good things about having a lot of drivers on the boat, and on our boat, it's kind of a protocol that you take yourself off the helm before it's suggested you get off the helm. And so, you know, if I feel squirrely or whoever's driving feels squirrely, they'll say, hey, I'm not feeling it, someone else drive. And it's a lot of work, it's a lot of focus, but we generally, when the sun comes up and we look around and see where we are relative to everybody else, we're generally pleased with how we did.
Tim, oh, go ahead, Greg.
I want to talk just a little bit about steering at night. You know, trimming the sails is obviously important. I try not to do that too much anymore. Excuse me. You know, when it's nighttime, it's like Chris was mentioning, you know, passing lanes in the light air. Well, there may not be lanes, but at nighttime there's great opportunities to do really well. And boats that win Mackinac races are good night sailors. I think almost without exception, you don't win one of those things without sailing well at night. So obviously you have to have the right lights, you know, effective telltale lights. There's a lot of lousy ones out there. There's a lot of ones that go off when they get wet. There's a lot of ones that spin on their fixture, and you have to have somebody up there adjusting them all the time. You know, make sure going into the race you have all that good. But so when you're steering, you pretty much this is what sailing is. You're going to be going upwind. And using your jib, maybe reaching a little bit, but you want your telltales to be flowing. So even though it's dark out, you want to steer into those telltales for the most part. And with a telltale light, it is very difficult to see the telltale that's on the outside of the sail. And it's very easy to get just lulled into, hey, I'm in the groove here, because you can't see it. You think it's pasted along that sail, and it's not. You need to watch your weather vanes. You know, you got a Windex at top. Just make sure I'm going the right angle into this wind. maybe every once in a while tweak it up just a little bit, make sure you get that flutter on the inside, because then you know you're right on the edge, and bend it back down into her. Sailing off the wind, when you're for the most part sailing a compass course and your buoys are trimming to you, we used to have those oil-filled compasses that you could actually watch, and they behave very slowly, and you could watch them pretty good to hold a pretty straight course. But now we have digital compasses, and those things jump all over the place, and you could be 5 degrees off before you even know you're 5 degrees off. And if you're not careful, you get into this herky-jerky sort of thing. Every time you move a rudder on a sailboat, you're going slower. So obviously you want to minimize that. Optional ways for steering the course are obviously steering on a light in front of you. We've all done that for hours on end. Steering on a star. You don't want to fixate on that for 20 minutes without looking. You're looking at your compasses, you're looking at your course, you're looking at everything, and you're saying, yeah, that star is good to steer by. But in those very, very dark nights when it's shut down with clouds and everything, you can't see any boats around you, and you don't have any stars to work with, you have to come up with an optional way of doing that. And I think something that works effectively, that no matter how dark it is, there's always one cloud that looks a little bit different than the others. And you can line that thing up along your shrouds, stay on that for your 2 or 3 minutes, check your instruments, make sure you're going straight, and hopefully minimize that waggling that you do is going to slow you down.
I'm going to skip around the script here a little bit because, Tim, you brought up the Swedish watch system. Can you explain that a little bit more in depth, and then somebody else can talk about a different system they have?
All right, well, I didn't invent this, but my understanding of the Swedish watch system and how we do it is on the Mackinac Race, everyone is on until 8 p.m., all right? And we're racing the boat just like we do in a buoy race, all right? Just pushing. And then we sail with a crew of 10, and we have 4 hours on, 4 hours off during the watch. And so I always give myself the longest watch, so I'm on until midnight. That's because I'm so amped up. I drink coffee and smoke cigarettes and stay amped up all day that I have a tough time going to sleep until about midnight. So I stay up the longest. And the other odd, or the fifth out of 4 person gets to stay out to midnight too. So that means 2 people go off at 8. All right, and then actually 5 people go off at 8, and one of them is off for 1 hour. They come back at 9 and then switch. Next one comes on at 10, and that person has stayed until 10. And then 11, and then 12. So once midnight rolls, everyone's in a 4 hours on, 4 hours off watch schedule. And so what that means is every 3 hours, 1 new person comes up, and every 4th hour, 2 people come up. And that maintains the 5 on, 5 off watch. And I do it that way primarily because it keeps continuity. As I mentioned earlier tonight, I try to have watch opposites of similar skill sets, and so I'll have a helmsman opposite me, and the 2 watch captains, if you will, they'll be at 4 hours, opposite of me. So there's always me and my opposite, and watch captain and a watch captain. So there's always 2 decision makers on shift at all times. And I found that works really well. If it's really mild out, say on Saturday, we get one of those super light air things, say, hey, go down and rest. We can sail the boat with 3 or 4 people on deck, and we'll ask people, if they want to go down below or go sit wherever the weight is most advantageous and rest up. Conversely, if the breeze picks up and we need weight on the rail, it's like, all right, you can sleep when you get to the island, all watches are canceled, everybody on the rail. And the people who are on watch, everyone's up. But people who are on watch are sailing the boat, and other people will, snooze or rest or close their eyes or, try and get some rest. But we put everybody up on the rail when it's necessary because it makes the boat go faster.
Chuck?
So I kind of, early on was, we started doing the Swedish watching. My brother was a big fan of the Swedish system, and we did that for years and years and years. Normally on cruises that were a little bit bigger, like Tim's talking about, nine plus, I would say, I looked it up because I'd never had before. I just got bored reading it, but it really didn't seem like it had anything to do with what Tim and I are describing when they started talking about the Swedish watch system. But at any rate, basically what happens is a new guy comes on deck every hour, right? So you're not having a wholesale change and, 5 guys stomping around down below trying to get dressed and, everybody runs up and says, okay, give me that, and everybody else runs down below. And if you make a wholesale change, there still has to be some transition, especially if the conditions are at all difficult. The guys that are on deck have been doing this. They've been doing it for a while. They know what the trends are. They know what the breeze is doing. Are we getting pumps in our lifts? Are we getting, is the wind up and down a lot, or is it pretty steady? What's the sea state doing? What's been our success when we need more power? You need to have a transition rather than just say, here, it's yours, and go down below. I think that's really, really distracting for everybody. It turns out that there's a lot of people moving at the same time, and the boat tends to slow down, and the helmsman tends to suffer. For smaller crews, I learned this a few years ago. I never had sailed on boats with like 6 very much. I mean, we did with my J105, but we started doing wholesale changes. But you're talking about 3 guys, right? So I always like to make sure that, and I think Tim alluded to this, that we pair up the watches so that there are like skill sets on each watch. And in fact, I would go farther in to say that there are really partners. So my 2 best trimmers would probably be on opposite watches. And when you do a Swedish system, they're never going to see each other. Okay? So the only rule then for me becomes like sometimes you got to have all hands on deck. Or in Tim's case, look, we're a few hours here, we need everybody to rail, right? For me, the rule with the partners was that you 2 guys can never be below at the same time. So if you're both tired, figure it out. One of you guys can go down and sleep for an hour and come back up and let your partner go down and sleep for a while. But in order to maintain the skill set on deck, the partners can never be down at the same time. So that's something that we did. It's a lot easier with 6 or 7 when you've got good people on the boat and they match up well, and you're changing 3 people. That's a little different story. At that point, I could see just having a watch A and a watch B and changing them. But like Tim, if you start to get into 10 people or more, I'm a proponent of having 1, or I've even seen 2 come up every hour, so that we're not disrupting the whole boat by having 5 or 6 guys climbing around every time there's a shift change.
Thanks, Jeff. In the interest of time, we're going to speed up just a little bit. But you have to talk about food. We're out there for a day or 2. You have to feed your crew. Greg, you have the biggest crew, physical body size and by numbers. What do you do to provision the boat and keep your crew well fueled for the race?
Well, we've tried many different systems over the years. From I remember we had Chef Joe. I'm sure most of you remember Chef Joe was a chef here for many years. Passed away recently, if you didn't know that. But a wonderful man, and he decided one year he was going to make food available for Mackinac racers, and so I said, yeah, okay, let's do that, I'll support the club. And I think we got 14 pounds of asparagus. I mean, there was these great big serving trays. We were just throwing it in the harbor as we're putting it on board. So that doesn't work very well. I've heard of people, I've never done it myself, where the skipper brings 1 pizza for each person and they get to nurse it all the way to Mackinac. However well they want to, I don't recommend that. One year we went with, and I think people do this, particularly Transpacks and things like that. We went with all freeze-dried food. You put the water in there and it has to sit for like 12 to 15 minutes, and my crew got too hungry and they ate it after about 8 minutes. It all swelled up in their belly. So that quickly went out the window. So we have resolved to, I believe that a crew needs warm food absolutely on Saturday and Sunday night. If you're out there Monday, well, tough luck. I'm not giving you warm food. So, you know, we have an oven. If you have an oven, that's great. You can prepare stuff at home. You know, we do boneless fried chicken. We barbecue sausages. We shrink wrap all that vacuum pack stuff and freeze it up. You know, you pop it out the day you want the sausages. You can just throw it in a pot of water. Easy hot food that will stick your boys' ribs a little bit. Lots of, you know, imagine that you're out there in, you know, behemoth waves and god-awful blow, and your job is to make sure these guys stay alive. Lots of jerky. You know, you can put a piece of jerky in your foul weather coat, take it out a year later, and it's the same. It lasts the entire race. You can get a little protein as you go. You know, we have snacks and crackers and stuff like that. But as the person who's in charge of it, I'm most interested in getting protein into the guys, and I don't really care about roughage much for a couple days. You know, so that's our philosophy.
Thanks, Greg. If you can pass that down to Chris. The news is already out there. The NOR is posted. Registration's open. But the 100th Mackinac Race is going to be sailed in the original 1925 race course. The sailing instructions for that race were very simple. Up the Michigan shore, which we've all done at some point, but then keeping Boys Blank Island to starboard and finishing the race sailing west to east. This was done because your first race was held at the same time as the Chicago race, that we could use their finish line. This is pretty exciting because there's nobody living that we're aware of that has done this race course. However, most of it's a short course. Chris, you've won a lot of races on the short course. For someone who hasn't, can you describe it a little bit? How would you break that race down into different phases?
Sure. So, you know, the start, even though it's a 200 and some odd mile race, and we take the start in the first hour of the race, extremely important. Whatever plan that we have in mind 30 minutes before the start, if we don't nail the start and we're spending time, you know, looking for clear air or trying to get separation from other boats, all of a sudden the plan isn't exactly there. And also the mood on the boat can quickly change. So you're trying to obviously win the start, but also set the mood and the tone for the race in that first hour. From there, you know, I would say the next segment is, you know, you're off to Harbor Beach during the first afternoon. During the first afternoon, generally speaking, again, you know, we're not afraid to go close to shore. As the day goes on and the sun's going down and it reaches dinner hour, there's always the conversation and dialogue begins to start as to what time it's time to get offshore. We were lucky enough to just barely get offshore last year. There were certainly some giant holes along the starting or the shore as we approached Harbor Beach and got up into the late afternoon. From there, you know, we're very neurotic as soon as we get out into Saginaw Bay about what our target number is to the Thunder Bay Light. You know, you're trying to keep the boat going fast, so it's not always the case where you can point directly at the light, but you know, we're always trying to sail the shortest distance possible. And then from there, you know, it kind of turns into morning as soon as you get around Thunder Bay Light. Again, not afraid to go near shore. You're forced into shore, obviously, as you approach Thunder Bay Light and Presque Isle. And, you know, I would say, generally speaking, from there, as you get around Presque Isle, it sometimes can be a bit of a parade, or you get ready for the big long beat into Mackinac Island.
And one thing, I described the course, I described the entire sailing instructions. There's no buoys you have to keep to port or starboard, but for Balboa Island. There's reefs, there's wrecks. I'll start with you, Chris, and then ask the panel if there's anything in particular that point out to, like, hey, you're going to want to stay away from that.
I can probably answer this question a lot better after I do it. Yeah, I've looked at the charts in Navionics, and you know, I don't think that there's anything major out there, and it's, you know, pretty similar as you approach the other side of Bois Blanc, and you got to be very careful how close that you get to it, and you know, you can certainly get close on the other side, but you know, at the end of the day, for every boat that's out there, this is a new experience. I think it's a good thing that we're doing it, and there'll be plenty of conversation as to what was the right way or the wrong way to handle the last 20 miles of the race.
Thanks, Chris. Anybody else want to add anything about that?
I've only done 2 short course races in my life, but we do have an opportunity on the Cove Island course to put ourselves up near Harbor Beach in the evening on Saturday, and I can say I've never had a positive experience there. So, this being my 3rd short course, I can tell you we probably won't be anywhere near there.
I have a similar experience with Hammond Bay. Try to stay away from that like the plague.
Yeah, that's a good call. So, as Kyle mentioned, nobody's really alive, anyways, has raced, leaving Pablo to starboard, and it intrigues me. I mean, I don't know about Chris, but you know, I think Pole Reef and that whole area up in there is fairly significant, and it's rocky. There may be opportunity for you to want to get as close as you can, but you're going to have to navigate it. But aside from the shallows and trying to you know, turn the corner and those types of things, I see a lot of potential for, you know, a whole nother race. You know, guys talk about there's a race to Cove and then there's a race in, right? I see a lot of potential for there being a race from Pablo in. I mean, I don't know what's going to happen in there, but there's all kinds of potential for some blowy beat. You know, and you know, when's the right time to get around the corner and go back, you know, turn the corner and go west. I mean, coming down in there with light air, who knows? I mean, that's, each side, the island side or the other side, could have its pitfalls, or maybe in the middle is the wrong place to go. I mean, none of us have done it, as Chris mentioned, but there's a lot of potential for that to be a whole little race in and of itself in there. So, we'll see.
Thanks. So I've done a few of the short courses over the years, and the first time I did it, I was crewing for Captain Chrome, John Runnell, on Magic Star in 2004, and having never done the short course, I turned to Fred Krieger, who I think between the 2 Mackinac races raced the island over 100 times. And I said, Fred, what's the secret to success on the short course? He said, well, there's a little ribbon of wind that goes along the shore. Sometimes it's close, sometimes it's a few miles out. Find it and stay in it. So we did that. We won overall. We were the first boat to finish, and I tell you, I thought the world at it because we showed up at an NA-40 to Mackinac Harbor, and we were the only boat there. It was weird. Cool, you know. But you know, like Chris and Chuck said, you know, I've looked at the Navionics charts quite a bit on the south side of Pablo, as well as after Chicago, I left my boat in Sheboygan prior to Trans-Superior, and so we paid close attention to conditions up there. And I think it's going to be really interesting. And if you know, if the wind is out of the west, you're going to be sailing upwind, you're going to be dodging reefs and rocks, and then you're going to crack off a little bit and put up an ASIM, and then you're going to crack off some more and build to the symmetrical. So make sure your bow crew is rested because it's going to be a lot of activity at the finish, I think.
I did my first Mackinac race the last year that the short course was the only course, so I don't really know anything about it. Just leave it at that.
Well, we'll start our final question with you, Greg. What would it mean to you to win the 100th Mackinac Race?
Well, there's no better feeling on earth to win a Mackinac race than I imagine winning that one. Has to be absolutely sublime. You know, I was interviewed, some guy wrote a book about the Mackinac race years ago. He interviewed me and I threw out a line, and the line was, you know, to survive a Mackinac race is victory, to win is sublime. And I believe that. I mean, it's a challenge, and just to get there, you've accomplished something, not what you set out to do, but you've accomplished something. Winning it is, you know, it keeps a smile on your face till the next July. That's how good it is. And I imagine winning the 100th one, maybe it'll last for 100 years. I don't know.
Tim?
Oh, I'm sure it will feel great. If they're fortunate. I'm also predicting that a large majority of the panelists will be on the podium within their respective classes. I think it's going to be a dogfight. You know, in the past several years, we've had 2 courses, and you know, if you look at the slowest boats and the fastest boats and the middle of the boats, you kind of have this bell-shaped curve, and a lot of the boats, and we're all in that, all 5 of us are in that bell-shaped curve area. We've had boats that maybe should be racing against each other on separate courses. And so this year, we're all racing together, all right? And it's going to be absolute war, and it's going to be a riot, and it's going to be the funnest race we've ever done. And so if anybody out here was on the fence and thinking about not doing it, do it. Just do it, okay?
Well, it only comes around every 100 years, so I guess in that sense it's pretty significant. Now, in all seriousness, I can't imagine. I mean, it's my goal is to win, you know, the Mackinac Race. It's always my goal to win the Mackinac Race, but the 100th certainly carries more weight, and to be able to accomplish that, if I'm lucky enough, and be able to look back and say, hey, you know, we were all in the 100th Mackinac Race, and I was fortunate enough to do well and win. I think that's something that you'll never forget.
I certainly want to win every Mackinac race that I do, but winning the 100th would certainly be something special. I may be the only guy in this panel that hasn't had the opportunity to drink Hummers out of the J.R. Hudson Trophy, so that's certainly something that I hope to do.
Yeah, I think it'll be the ultimate bragging rights. We've had the fleet split up for a number of years now, 15 boats on each side, Cove Island and Shore Course, and you've got everything combined this year. I think we're up to 250 boats already. Maybe if we're lucky enough, it'll approach 300. And at that point, with it being the 100th Mackinac Race, and most boats sailed in one fleet, certainly in I don't know how many years, you've got the ultimate bragging rights if you win it.
It's great. Thanks, guys. I wanted to keep this to 2 hours, and we just about did that. So let's give a hand to our panelists. I'm sure some of you will be in the bar for a little bit for people to bend your ear or buy you a drink. So I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, everybody for watching on the internet, and you can go to bycmac.com for more information about the race, as well as to request an invitation to sail, and we look forward to seeing you all in July.